Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
San Clemente, California. Thanks, Bill. My name is Clint. I'm alcoholic. And I'm glad to be here. Bill's glad I'm here. And I want to thank Dick and the committee for inviting me to come over. It's wonderful to be here in Denver. I have a sister, Joan, who lives here in Denver, and she's here tonight. We haven't seen one another in a few years, and she's here with her husband and my good friend Paul, and so we had dinner together and some laughs, and I was born in this town, and so I'm in a sense returning to the scene of the crime. I was born sober. I like the theme of this conference, back to basics. I think that maybe we can talk about that a little bit tonight. I don't know how many people are new in Alcoholics Anonymous here tonight, but I imagine that there must be a few people in their first, say, 30 days of sobriety, and if that's the case, I welcome you. I hope you find the things in Alcoholics Anonymous that the rest of us are finding here, because there are some incredible things here. And to be included in a program like this with the people that you're going to be hearing this weekend is a wonderful thing. I'm a little nervous about it. In fact, it's kind of funny. Dick and I were talking the other day about the program and about the conference, and I guess I had it on my mind because I had a dream about some of the people that are here. It was kind of I don't really remember my dreams very often, but it was kind of a funny scene because it wasn't that I died and gone to heaven, but I was looking into heaven and was able to recognize some of the people that were there, and I saw in my dream some of the people that are here. And I was talking to some authority figure like St. Peter or something, and I saw a guy said, I remember Dick D. from the cruise, and I said, isn't that Dick D. coming by there? And they said, yeah, that's Dick Daly. They said, they don't care about anonymity up there, and and he was, and I said, well, who is that with? And Dick was with some huge 300-pound gal that had wine sores all over her face, just a big, ugly thing, and he was shackled. I said, what happened? And they said, well, Dick damn near didn't make it up here, and so instead of sending him down there below, he's got to be shackled to that thing for 5,000 years, and then he can stay. And I thought, kind of a weird dream. And then I saw my friend Arbutus, and I said, isn't that? And they said, yeah. And I said, and she was with some misshapen little thing, and I said, what is that? And they said, well, she damn near didn't make it up there, and she has to run around with that thing for 10,000 years. And then come through some distance away, I could see Dick G. And he was walking with Raquel Welch. And I said, what is that? Dick with that mess and Arbutus with that little thing, and I know that Grant's very spiritual kind of a guy, but Raquel Welch, how did that happen? And they said, well, Raquel damn near didn't make it up there. I've had more fun as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous than I ever dreamed possible. I did not plan to come to AA. It was not on my schedule of things to do. I got here about 15 years ago, and I like to remember, it's important to me to remember, that 15 years ago when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, AA was doing real well. And you were just doing fine. I was not doing so well. I was living in Glendale, California, in a garage with 3 other guys. And we were talking about it at dinner, I'd failed in every department of my life. I was 29 years old and was a failure. And I'd done it all on merit. I had a lot of warrants out for my arrest. For bad checks and for drunk driving and for not paying child support. And I collected them every, I didn't ever keep up. They seemed to be getting ahead of me. I was selling encyclopedias door to door when I could get out of bed. I was living in that garage with 3 other guys. It was a double garage and had been cut up into 4 rooms, and each of us had a room. I never saw those other guys. I heard them once in a while. One of us would wake up in the morning and begin to vomit, and the rest of us would just kind of join in like a choir practice. I was not at the top of my game. And I never planned any of it. I stood in front of the judge in that Glendale Municipal Court many, many times. And there was a lineup, and you stood there in line, and they'd call my name, the case, the people against Clinton Michael Hodges. And I'd stand up there, and he'd read the charges. And then they want to know how you plead. Guilty or not guilty. And I always wanted another choice. I have a friend in L.A. that says when she's shopping at the meat counter, she just wishes there was another animal to choose from. And sometimes I heard him say guilty with an explanation, and I wanted to say that because I've been guilty since I was 4. I'm just guilty. I must love to feel guilty because I'm guilty. I heard a gal say one night she felt vaguely responsible for World War II, and I'm guilty. I grew up in a home where we heard a lot about hellfire and brimstone, and I just went for all of that. They talked about love and faith and hope in that home too, but I didn't have the affinity for that. I liked the starker message that was there, and I stood in front of the judges and said guilty. I was guilty. Maybe not of the charge that was on the books that day. If the charge was drunk, public drunk, for example, I wasn't really drunk. Not what you'd call drunk. I mean, if I remembered the arrest, I didn't think I was drunk. Or if it was bad checks. I had been out of the Marine Corps during that period of time, 4, 5, 6 months. They'd given me some mustering out pay. I put the pay in the bank. The bank gave me some blank checks, and I guess I thought it'd all come out even. The checks lasted a little longer than the money did. But I got plenty of signatures, so what the hell, And what I did was quit subtracting. And I wasn't guilty of uttering a bad check. I mean, not really guilty. If that bartender had taken that check down right then, who knew? It might have gone through, You don't know. Or drunk driving. I got arrested for drunk driving in Glendale one morning on Colorado Boulevard at 10 o'clock. I pulled up to a stoplight and stopped for the red light. And the light turned green and yellow and red and green. I was resting there. There was a police car right behind me. But I wasn't drunk. I don't know why when he opened the door of my car I fell out in the pavement, but I wasn't drunk. But I said so many times, guilty, Your Honor. Guilty, Your Honor. And it's a sad business. Because I had so many of the advantages in my life. I mean, there wasn't any reason why I should have been there saying guilty, Your Honor. That song, that line in Bojangles, but most of the time I spend behind these county bars. God, that just grabs me because it's a wasted life. And there I was. And you go to one side and talk to the bailiff, and you go either back in the cell, or you pay the fine, or you make arrangements to pay the fine, or you do the thing. And one of the worst parts of it is that if you go back in that cell, you say to yourself, if you're like me, if I ever get like that guy in the next cell, I'll do something about my drinking. Because I'm not an alcoholic. I'm too young. And I'm too bright, and I'm too aggressive, and I'm too this, and alcoholics don't work. And after all, I sell those encyclopedias. Mainly and ultimately and finally, alcoholics don't care. I mean, you can tell by looking at them. They don't give a damn. And I care. Therefore, I cannot be an alcoholic. And that's the way it was. I had a radio in that little room. And that radio would play pretty music. But it would never turn off. Even when I'd turn it off, I could still hear the music. I'd pull the plug out of the wall, I could hear the music. I'd look out in the alley, and I would think there might be a band out there. I would think there's my bed frame is picking up signals from Del Rio, you know. I have not forgotten the night I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and heard a man from Riverside say he'd taken his radio out to the laundry tubs to drown the damn thing one night. The penny dropped. Oh, there wasn't any music. Oh. The beginning of the end, the beginning of the truth for me occurred in an odd little way, in an odd little moment, one morning as I was walking down a side street in Glendale. I had left my little room in the little garage to go out and make the run to go get some booze. And I was shuffling down the street. And I believe I was clothed appropriately, whatever. I had been drinking for 7 or 8 days and then stopped for a couple of days, and now I was off to try to get some booze. And I had discovered before this that when I approach a bartender or a liquor store clerk under those circumstances and try to order something, I usually come up with a croak more than anything else. My voice is and I was so afraid it would give me away, and I discovered that if I talked out loud a little bit, it would straighten out my voice. And so I was in the habit of going down the street and I'd count to 100 maybe, or sing a little song, or it doesn't seem insane when you're doing it because you understand why, you know. And I was walking down that side street in Glendale that morning, and I don't know if I was talking or singing or counting or telling myself a few jokes. I don't know what I was doing, if anything, but walking along. But a woman came toward me on the sidewalk, and I made a mistake. I looked at her. Our eyes met for just an instant, and I saw something in her eyes that I had not counted on seeing that day. She looked at me with pity and with disgust. And she told me more than I had been willing to hear from anybody else. I mean, she passed by, there wasn't any incident, she kept going, and I've never seen her since. Many, many people had told me by this time that I drank too much. They said, Clint, for God's sake, you're destroying your marriage. For God's sake, you're supposed to be an officer in the United States Marine Corps. For God's sake, you're here in dental school, and you're a menace to the people around you. For God's sake, your children are afraid of you. But I always knew they were overstating the case. I always understood them to be like insurance salesmen implying I would die. They just had a point to make, you know. Excuse me, Dick. And this woman couldn't have cared less whether I lived or died. I just disgusted her. I didn't stop drinking then. In fact, I needed to drink more than I had before I saw her. But it was the beginning of the truth. It was the beginning of the truth. I put in some bad nights in that room. I remember one night laying there about 3 in the morning. There was a window in my room that opened out into what had been the driveway when it was a garage, and some car about 3 a.m. pulled into the driveway just to turn around in the middle of the night, and the lights flashed through my room and onto the wall, and I was laying there awake, and I went under the bed because they were there. I don't know who it was, but whoever comes after guys like me at 3 a.m. had arrived, you know. And I lay under that bed a long time that night, afraid. I was always afraid by then. One night I woke up in that little room, and those 3 guys that lived in the garage with me were in my room, and I always locked the door from the inside, and I couldn't imagine how they got there. And I stood up, and one of them hit me, and I went down. And I stayed down for a while, thinking they would go away, and when I thought they were gone, I stood up again, and I got hit again, and I went down again. And I got up again and tried to carry the battle to them, and it didn't work because I'd been drinking so much. I was very weak, and I had no courage and no strength and no stamina. And they gave it to me pretty good that night. And I would lay on that sticky, nasty linoleum floor for what seemed like hours, thinking they'd gone, and I'd stand up and they'd be there. And I lay on the floor after that and didn't get up anymore. And I, about first light, began to understand there was a rat over in the corner, and I was afraid to move for fear it would attack me. And that turned out, as it got lighter, to be a sock laying there. And I looked around, and the guys were gone. They were gone. And the door was still locked from the inside, and I looked to see if they pulled the wall apart some way and the paint was not cracked. And it was an incident that I couldn't discuss with anybody. I never did bring that up. I never tried to confront them again. I looked in the mirror and my face was marked up pretty good, and there was blood around it. It's not the result of social drinking. Now, that's how I was. And I don't know that we spend a whole lot of time on how we got there so much, but there are some things in my life that seem to have been responsible for some of my reactions. I grew up with an odd set of attitudes, an odd set of beliefs, if you will. I grew up in a family, as I said, where there was kind of a wild dichotomy. My father was a drunk. And when he was around, he was unpredictable, violent, and he brought that kind of atmosphere into the home. My mother was a religious person, and a lot of the time we lived with her parents, and in that home, what I sensed is essentially a matriarchal home. We heard a lot about hellfire and brimstone, and we were taken to church 3 and 4 times a week, and we were told to give our hearts to Jesus. And I looked around at those people that had given their hearts to Jesus, and they never looked like they were any too damn happy about what they'd done with their heart, you know. Always seemed to make them real nervous. And I didn't want what they had. On Sunday morning at Church of the Air in Billings, Montana, I'd sit on the back pew, and the people would go down to the front after the service was over to get saved. Sometimes I wanted to go down there. Sometimes I felt like I'd like to believe what they believe, and I knew I couldn't believe what they believed. I didn't know why I couldn't believe it, but I knew I couldn't believe. My uncle went down there to get saved. They sent him to China to be a missionary. That'll keep you on the pew a while, you know. I noticed the women in the church made a lot of bandages for the missionaries, and I didn't know for sure what he did, but if you need that many bandages, it is not good work. We had a lot of questions around our house. My dad used to say, if he was around, he'd say, when are you going to be a man? I don't know. I don't know. My mother used to say, or my grandmother, where will you spend eternity? I don't know. I don't know. Or they'd take a few minutes and tell us where we were going to spend eternity. Have you found God yet? No. What will you do when you meet your Maker? What will you do? I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes in a comforting tone we'd hear, He holds you in the hollow of His hand. And I always hoped He wouldn't notice me. I had the feeling if He ever did, He'd give it one of those, you know. It wasn't until I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous a few years and had heard something about living a day at a time that I understood there was never a day at a time message in any of it, you know. What will you do when you meet your Maker? I don't know, but I know it isn't going to be any fun. There is a passage, a part of chapter 5 that's read at the meetings, at the end of the part that's read, that says that no human power could relieve us of our alcoholism, and that God could and would if He were sought. And I heard that at meetings after meeting after meeting, and I never heard it. I never heard it. What I heard was an echo from my childhood. What I heard them say was that God can and might if you can find Him. And it doesn't say that. It says God can and will if He were sought. Incidentally, this meeting tonight was opened with a prayer, an invocation. And I will talk about a relationship with God that I have developed since I got sober. I did not believe in God when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not have to believe in God in order to stop drinking. And if you're new here tonight, nervous about whether or not you will find anything useful to you here in Alcoholics Anonymous because you just simply don't have any way to talk about God, welcome. That's how we get here. That's how we get here. And I hope that you'll understand when I say this is a spiritual program, and it is a spiritual program, that I'm not talking about a religious program. I'm talking about my spirit. I'm talking about my spirit. You can be an atheist if you choose. All you have to do is decide, if they say, whether you want to be a sober atheist or a drunk atheist. If you want to be a sober atheist, welcome aboard. You probably will change your mind about all that, but it is not necessary. That can be a decision for another day. So I grew up in this home, and I wouldn't for a minute suggest that that was the beginning of any alcoholism in my system. I don't believe so. I have, as I said, my sister Joan. She's not an alcoholic, grew up in the same home. I have a little brother who's not an alcoholic, and I have an identical twin brother who is not an alcoholic. Now, when I got to AA, I was very worried about how I caught this thing, you know. Now, how come me and not Bimbo there, you know? How come when I was getting thrown in the Glendale drunk tank, he was graduating with honors from college, huh? How about that? We're identical twins. You tell me if I'm brought up in an alcoholic home, I have a better chance of getting it? You tell me it might be hereditary. How come he didn't catch it if I did? And this guy and I took a different path someplace along the line. I grew up with some feelings that he doesn't seem to have. One of the things that I grew up with was a sense of something that Peggy Lee finally put into words for me about the time I was getting sober. She called it, "Is That All There Is?" She sang a song about it, and I always knew what she was talking about. I mean, there just does not seem to be enough in life. Whether it's the birth of a child, or a love affair, or a marriage, or a job, or a car, or whatever it is, you're left with the odd feeling after a while. Is that all there is to whatever? I remember on Christmas night, after the gifts were opened, and we folded up the wrapping paper and put it back in the drawer for another year. Is that all there is to Christmas? Is that it? And it wasn't because the gifts were scroungy. They were, but I'm not going to bring that up. I don't even want to mention that. It's that there's a promise to Christmas, and nobody fulfilled the promise again this year. Our mother died when I was 14, and I stood at her grave. Is that all there is? I should surely to God be feeling something, and I'm just neutral about all this. My first son was born when I was 19. Is that all there is? I don't want to be married. I don't want to have a son. I don't want these responsibilities. Is that all? People say congratulations. For what? For what? Is that all there is? And you know, the magic of alcohol for me was that when I was 17 and took that first drink or two or three, I discovered something very important. If I drink just a little bit of booze, there comes a time that lasts maybe 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, maybe an evening, when I don't have to say, is that all there is? Now that's magic. That does something very important for me. And I loved it. I had another problem when I was growing up, and that is that they told us a lot about potential, and I got the idea that I should be operating up here, and I can only operate down here, and God, I thought life's work was to get the level of my performance up here to some mystical place where I should be because of potential. And this gap just about drove me crazy because I can't quite get it all together. I'd read books and have inspirational thoughts and do this and that and the third thing, and I'd just maybe for an afternoon get it, and then I'd have a dirty thought, and I'd be back where I was, you know. You have so much potential. And there was something else. I was ashamed of our family. I was ashamed of my dad because he was a drunk. And I was ashamed of the car he drove. I was ashamed of the house we lived in. I was ashamed of my mother. And that bothered me so much because I felt like I should be proud of her. I knew it was tacky to be ashamed. It cuts two ways. I was ashamed of her, and I was ashamed of being ashamed of her. And she was a pretty lady, and she conducted herself very well, and there wasn't any reason. But that's just how I felt about it. I remember we moved to Denver in the 8th grade. We moved a lot. Every time the rent was due, it seemed we moved. It wasn't really like that, but we bounced around a lot. We went to 18 different schools just to get out of high school. And in the 8th grade, we moved back to Denver, lived over here in by Cherry Creek, and went that year over to Maury Junior High School. Long involved bus ride over there. And sometimes after football practice or after the last class was over with, we'd get a ride home with somebody's folks in their Cadillac or Chrysler. It seemed like they had some money over there at Maury. And they'd take us down in that area, sort of down near where we lived. And I always would say, it's right around the corner, about 6 blocks away from where we really lived, up on the hill a little bit. The houses didn't look so bad. And I'd say, let me out here. Let me out here. And I would be glad to run the 6 blocks just to keep those people from seeing that place where we really live, because I was so ashamed of it. I would hope that they would think we lived up there on the hill where they had lawn and paint on the walls and glass in the windows and that fancy stuff. Now, my brother didn't have that set of reactions. He took a healthier approach to things. He's one of these guys, as I say, that seemed to do it all right. He was graduated with honors from college about the time I was getting thrown in the Glendale drunk tank. He was one of these guys that eats breakfast. He mows the lawn, you know. He's just... He drinks moderately. He just had a different approach to things. He and I were laughing a couple of years ago. We ran into one another. Winnie and I were laughing because it was in Palm Springs a few years ago. I hadn't seen Carl in a while, and we were talking about things. And he told me about a circumstance that occurred to him when he was a freshman at the University of Utah. He apparently had gotten into a little difficulty in class there. Now, when he talks about difficulty, and I talk about difficulty, I mean, he'd been late to class 10 minutes one day, or, you know. It's a heartbreaking story, I'll tell you that. It was 10 days late with a house bill or something, but he told me that he started to, get a little sloppy with details. One of the other brothers took him aside, one of the old salts back from Korea, maybe 22. They called him Pops, I suppose. And he took him aside and said, "Carl, I see you're having a little trouble here." And Carl said, "Yeah, but I can handle it." And the guy said, "I suppose you could handle about any crisis that ever came along in your life, couldn't you?" And Carl said, "You're damn right I could." And he said, "Did it ever occur to you that there's more to life than that we sometimes have an obligation to ourselves to anticipate crises that might be developing and take some kind of preventative action so that the crisis is smoothed out and doesn't ever become a problem to us?" And Carl said, "Well, I'll be damned. He wrote that down. He's been living like that ever since." And so sometimes he'd be with me in the car from Maury Junior High down to Cherry Creek, and I'd say, "It's just down around the corner, let me out here." And Carl would say, No, it's down here about 6 blocks. And we get right in front of that place. And he'd say, that's it there. And I go, "Gee." And so in Palm Springs I said, "What about that? Didn't it ever bother you?" You know what he said? He said, "I never accepted the responsibility for the condition that place was in." I could have hit him. I'll tell you what kind of a guy he is. We're identical twin brothers. He fastens the seatbelt. I don't think he does it maliciously, but damn it, he does it. You know what I mean? Well, the point is, of course, that's a healthier approach to life than I ever knew about. We took a different tack. And so I'm left with a bad conclusion that one of the messages that comes out of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, if you're new here, is not a pleasant message. The message is, your life's your own fault. I'd love to lay it at the feet of my mother or my grandmother or my father or whoever, but it just won't stay put because of that identical twin brother of mine. He took a different tack someplace along the line, and I'm left with the conclusion that it never was the things that happened to me. It was my reaction to those things that always got me in trouble. Immature, self-obsessed, unrealistic, unwilling to accept life on life's terms. And so with those kind of problems going for me, not serious problems, but faintly disturbing problems that really got in the way of my living at peace in the world, when it came time for me to take a drink, and when I discovered that booze was a solution to those problems, I had a secret. The booze was not a problem. It was a solution to the problems that I already had going in. Problems not caused by anybody else, just problems. Problems that I had never learned to deal with. And once I began to drink and discovered that the problems could be solved that way, I never had to deal with them. And I didn't know at first why that the booze would solve any of those problems. I didn't know why my dad drank. I thought he drank because he could be meaner than he could otherwise be. I really did. I drank that first drink because we weren't supposed to. It was, and that's not alcoholic. That's just the way human nature is. I ran into a friend of mine not long ago. He had a beard. I hadn't seen him in a while. I said, "How'd you happen to grow the beard? It looked good on him." And I said, "Huh?" He said, "Oh, I really don't like it." And I said, "Why don't you shave it off?" He said, "Well, I'll probably have it for a while." I said, "What happened? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I was a couple months ago up in the hills with my kids. We packed in and we stayed up there 2 weeks, and I grew the beard then." and I was going to shave it off when I got back down, and we got home one afternoon, and my wife took one look at me, and she said, shave off that beard. Took all his options away. You know. When they told me don't go to movies, they're sinful, I went to movies. We didn't smoke. It was a sin to gamble. I had to take a note to the teacher in dancing class in the 7th grade. It's against the tenets of our religion to dance. Do not allow Clint and Carl to go to dance class. And so, of course, booze was just another thing that was forbidden, and I had tried the things that were forbidden, and they were all interesting, and I assumed that booze would be the same thing, you know. That's not alcoholic. They say that's why Adam and Eve went after that apple in the garden. They weren't crazy for fruit. They just weren't supposed to, you know. In fact, I heard somebody say they should have forbidden them the snake, and they'd eaten that damn thing and saved us all a lot of trouble. So I had a secret because that booze did something for me that nothing had ever done before. And by the time I was 22 years old, I got married early. I had been married for 4 years. I had 2 sons. I had borrowed a lot of money from her father and gotten a college education. I'd been accepted to dental school at the University of Oregon. And I had crossed over while the invisible line might exist, and I was drinking alcoholically. And I didn't know I was alcoholic. That secret sickness that we have is secret from us. I knew I was an alcoholic. I knew it all the time. I knew it 2 years later when they threw me out of dental school. And they should have thrown me out of dental school, and it was a source of comfort to a lot of the patients at the dental school. Somebody told me that the faculty and a lot of the students thought I was an alcoholic, and to show them how open-minded I was on the subject, because I knew that closed-mindedness was a symptom. I went to a meeting of AA in Portland, and I was 24 years old, and I knew that whatever it was that was wrong with those guys in that AA meeting was not the same that was wrong with me at all. And I left that meeting, and not long after that, I noticed there was a sign outside of the post office in Portland that says the Marine Corps builds men. And I went. And I spent those 3 years, after going through officer candidate school and basic school in Quantico, Virginia, I spent those 3 years on active duty standing around in front of somebody's desk trying to explain why I was drinking so badly. For a while, that uniformed helped. For a while, that little brown bar on my shoulder provided enough of a buffer and gave me enough authority that I could hang on. And, you know, there was something else, and that is the Marine Corps has a way of motivating people. It motivated me. I always wanted to be a good Marine. The day never came that I was too cool to be a good Marine. I tried, but I'm a drunk, and the two don't mix. I don't mean I'm a heavy social drinker. I don't mean I'll go out there and raise hell all night and still be able to show up and pack the gear in the morning. I mean I'm a drunk. And when I drink, I'm in a lot of trouble. And so I wound up standing in front of the general, the commanding officer at El Toro. I was on the staff at the NCO Leadership School, and that's a fit and polish showcase for West Coast Marines. And when I was on, I was on. And when I was drunk, it was all over. And when I'd been drinking, there wasn't any way to... One of the things that is interesting to note is that an alcoholic, once he introduces an ounce of alcohol into a system, cannot predict his behavior. And I could not predict my behavior. I didn't always get drunk, but more and more I was getting drunk, and I never, ever knew. And I had a gift for getting drunk at the wrong time. I stood in front of the general one day. He said, and he gave me a letter of reprimand. He read unsatisfactory fitness reports out loud that had been written about me by my superiors. In detail, it's a drag to stand at attention in front of somebody's desk while they read derogatory information about you. In a wealth of detail, they had all this stuff. One major got it down in one sentence. I was almost grateful for his brevity, but it was kind of cold. He said, this officer consistently fails to live up to the low standards he has set for himself. I went on the wagon for 6 weeks. I was never going to drink again. 6 weeks later, I'm drunk. And a couple of months later, I'm back in front of the general. And another letter and a fine. And this time the general looked at me and he said, you know, Lieutenant, there isn't any room in the Marine Corps for an alcoholic. I couldn't believe it. He finally dismissed me, and I did an about-face and walked out of his office, and I knew I was not alcoholic. I knew that he was crazy if he thought I was. And I knew one more thing. I knew I needed to drink more than anything else that morning. And there you have it. And I got a drink. I got a bottle of booze and put it underneath the seat of the car and drove through the gate, collected my salute, and went out into the orange groves north of the Marine Corps Air Station at El Toro, and for 2 drinks. I mean, if I wanted to get drunk, I'd have taken bourbon. I took vodka so I could, leave you breathless. It also left me penniless, friendless, and homeless, is what it did. And I'd wake up at the end of the day. I went out there many times for 2 drinks and never got out of the orange groves. And so I finally got out of the Marines and I moved to Glendale, and I started out living in an apartment, and then I found the garage. And I'm selling encyclopedias and going to jail. And I knew it was going to end someday against a freeway abutment. Or I'd burn myself up in that little place. A cigarette would go into the mattress. I knew there was something bad wrong. And I knew the only answer that I had to any of it was another drink. And I'd given myself over to it, and I drank when I was conscious, or I agonized and shook it out and waited for a chance to drink again. And a bail bondsman that I was selling encyclopedias for one morning said, "Clint, where have you been?" And I said, "I've been drunk." He said, "For a week? I haven't seen you in a week." And I said, "I guess so." Has it been a week? And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I got to take you someplace today." And I thought he might take me to jail again, or back to county hospital, or maybe to Camarillo, the laughing academy over there. Kind of welcomed those trips. I kind of thought if he took me to jail, I'd come off that drunk. I kind of felt that if I went to the hospital, they'd give me pills. I knew if I went to Camarillo, they'd find that brain tumor. I would have given my left arm for a brain tumor, Because, God, I'd love to know why I act like this. I didn't want to be a drunk. I did not want to be a drunk. I don't think any of us ever did. And he and another guy about noon that day on a hot Wednesday in Glendale in 1966 took me across town, and we went around behind the laundry and climbed a long flight of stairs and went into a room much smaller than this, and in the back were tables with chairs around them, and there were about a dozen there, men and women sitting around, and I sat down and somebody poured me a half a cup of coffee. And I discovered during that meeting that it was an AA meeting. Somebody said, "Do you think you can get through the rest of the night without taking another drink?" And I thought, yeah. I've never forgotten the way he said it, because it wasn't as if you should, It wasn't as if you can't possibly. He was curious, genuinely curious about how I was doing on that particular point. He said, "Do you think you can get through the rest of the day without taking another drink?" And he told me that what I ought to do that night was go to a meeting in Hollywood, and told me there was a speaker over there. I sat in the park in Glendale all that afternoon wondering if I wanted to get involved with those people. I mean, I had been to ministers about my drinking. I had been to chaplains about my drinking. I had been to psychologists and marriage counselors about my drinking. I had been to psychiatrists about my drinking. You don't have to go to the cops. They come to you about your drinking. And how could a group of drunks that weren't drinking make any difference in my life? I went to that meeting in Hollywood that night and I heard a guy talk. He talked about bad checks, and he doubled my vision of AA. I thought, God, it's not only about booze, it's about bad checks, too. And I had a lot of them out. Turns out it's about every area of my life. Every area. It's the most incredible thing. There are 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard them read early on in these meetings. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't get sober then. I got drunk once more after that. And I got back to Alcoholics Anonymous on the 15th of August that year. And so last Friday, I was sober 15 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is God's grace. That has almost nothing to do with me except mechanically. I believe when we talk about back to basics, to me, we're talking about how I act. And that's all we're talking about. There isn't any way that I can change how I think by deciding to think better thoughts. There isn't any way that I can change how I feel about anything just by deciding to feel differently. Thank God there is a way I can change, and I have to change, and I have changed, because the guy that I was on August 15th, 1966 was a drunk. And that drunk is still around and will drink again if I don't change and keep changing, if I don't sit up and pay attention. I love it in Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is central to my life. It is the most important thing in my life. I love it here, and I love being sober. And I love being able to stand with you in any meeting, any place, and take my place among the miracles that are here. There's more miracles in this. I remember as a kid they talked about miracles, and they talked about blind men that could see, and people that were crippled that got up and walked, and they talked about, and there are more miracles in this room tonight than they have in all the accounts in the Bible. Miracles, because we're supposed to be dead or drunk or locked up. And we're sitting here, I feel that living in dignity and being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous is a priceless thing. But I came in here with some attitudes that made it problematical at best. Attitudes I really didn't even know I had, that I was not really in touch with, until I heard comments about them from podia in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, from other members of AA. Like, I discovered that I was hallucinating about the music in the little room when I heard the guy from Riverside say he'd taken his radio out to the I remember with clarity the night I heard a man say that all his life he had the feeling that other people got secret instruction in how to get along in this world that he didn't get. I asked that guy to be my sponsor. And he still is today. I heard somebody from a podium in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous say, "You can't get well in style." Oh my. I want so much to be cool about all this. I want to cross that stream in its narrowest point and just go up the other side and never look back, and I'm a sick pup. My progress in AA was not rapid, and is not rapid. I'm not a rocket to start them around here. And so I looked at those steps. There's 12 steps. And I knew that they really wouldn't make much of a difference in my life, because the steps as articulated in Alcoholics Anonymous appeared to me to be a rehash of what I had heard about dealing with other people and with God as a kid. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And then after I'd been around here for a while, I came to the conclusion that the steps seemed to be working for you, for some of you. But that didn't mean that they would work for me. In fact, I was pretty sure they didn't. And part of the fear, that terrible fear of taking, for example, an inventory, a written inventory, is that if I take it and it doesn't work for me, where will I go then? What will I do then? And I have another problem, and that is, I don't deserve to have these steps working for me. I don't know why, but I just don't deserve it. And from an AA podium one night, a guy said, "The steps don't know who it is that's taken them." They'll work for anybody. That means they'll work for me. And it doesn't matter whether I deserve it or not. In fact, it never has. A remarkable thing I've discovered since I've been sober, and discovered it from you, is that I don't get what I deserve. Thank God. I get what I choose. I get what I choose. And today I chose to be sober, and so did you. Do we deserve it? Who cares? We're sober because we chose to be sober. We chose to take the chance that nothing so bad would happen to us today that we would need to drink. We chose to postpone one drink one day, and here we are, living in the world. And we don't get what we deserve. We get what we choose. All that was slow and hard thought, because I come in here big on shortcuts. I love shortcuts. I don't do the things necessary to make me feel that way. If I want to feel bright, I don't study. I tell you how bright I am. If I want to feel comfortable, I don't pay my bills. I have a drink or a pill. I love those shortcuts. If I want to have some money, I don't work and earn it. All right? I've got a few more signatures left. I love those shortcuts. And of course we come in here surviving on our character defects. And it's a little tough to give something up that you've been surviving on for a while. I think that may be why step 3 is ahead of step 6 and 7. But something happened to me when I was 5 days sober, the beginning of what I believed to be some concept about what might be back to basics. I went up to a guy in that club in Glendale when I was 5 days sober. I had gotten drunk and come back to AA on a Monday, and it was Friday night, and after the meeting was over, a speaker had spoken, and I went up to a guy that looked like a kind man to me, and I said, how do you get to sleep at night if you don't drink? I thought that was a fresh question. And he said, you really want to get to sleep tonight? And I said, yeah. And he said, where do you live? And I said, well, I live down the street. I didn't want to tell him I live in a garage because I want to be cool. I was standing there with a pair of Levi's on and a T-shirt and tennis shoes and one sock on, but I want to be cool. I'm a little too cool for this anyway, you know. And he said, do you live alone? And I said, yeah. Oh, he said, well, he said, in your case, just for openers, you really want to get to sleep tonight? And I said, yeah, I'm a little sorry I brought it up now. He said, I'll tell you what you do just for openers, make your bed. And I thought, oh, I get that from my mother. Housekeeping hints we're going to hear. Marine Corps gave me that. He said, and then he said, he saw that dull gray film come down over my eyes, I guess. And he said, really? He said, put clean sheets on your bed. And I wondered how he knew about those sheets. You've always known a little more than you should. I mean, the psychiatrist never talked about the sheets. So he's got my attention now, and I said, yeah. And I was picturing those sheets. I turned them up over the closet door to dry. I never did put them back on the bed. And then he said, I'll tell you what else you do. If you get the bed made, say a prayer to yourself. And he even told me the prayer. He said, say this one, if God be for us, who can be against us? Oh, I don't think so. That's St. Paul. I knew that was St. Paul. I never did like St. Paul. And I had tried that. I'd gone to bed in clean beds before. I'd said prayers. We cut our eye teeth on prayers at night. They don't help. Biggie around our place was, now I lay me down to sleep, if I recall. Remember that? You get to that part about if I should die before I wake, that'll keep you awake a while, just milling through the details. So I kind of lost interest in this old bird. I got back to my little apartment, little garage room that night, and I was annoyed with him. But there was one thing I couldn't get out of my mind. He knew about those sheep. And he had something else. He had a kindness about him that I've seen over and over again since then in AA meetings. A love and a warmth about him that I've come to be deeply appreciative of. Walter one night, years later, talked about it. He said it was the Molokai look. He'd been to the island of Molokai and visited with the people that had worked with the lepers. And those people had become disfigured in some way in the course of working with the lepers. And in the process, they weren't very pretty, except that they had a look about them. And he said it was the look of people that are consistently willing to give more than they get out of life. And this man had that look. I couldn't have defined it or come close to it at all that night, but he had that look. And because he had that look, and because he knew about those sheets, I found myself with clean sheets on my bed, considering whether or not to say that stupid prayer. I knew it wouldn't work. I knew it wouldn't work, and my alternatives are a little bit bleak because if I don't get to sleep, I'm going to lay there all night long and stare at the ceiling, and those old tapes that are laying around in my head are going to begin to play, and I'm going to think about that time I discovered the hard way that I can't get my family moved 60 miles up the road. I'm going to begin to think about that night I stole $5 out of that woman's purse in a bar just to continue to drink. I'm going to begin to think about that time I hit my kid too hard. I'm going to begin to think about that time that I told that silly lie to that little girl that I felt so bad about later. I came in here with a lot of secrets, a lot of little nickels and dimes that were driving me crazy. And I really didn't want to go through the night thinking about them. And the only answer I have is to go out and get a pint and knock myself out that way, and I knew if I did that I'd wake up at 4 in the morning and have to do all over again. So I made the bed, and now I got a decision to make, and against my best judgment and knowing it wouldn't work, I started to say that stupid little prayer he told me to say. And the next thing I knew, it was 7 o'clock the next morning. And I'd slept that night. I slept. I hadn't slept in a year. I'd been passed out and blacked out a lot. I'd collapsed, but I hadn't slept. Not without nightmares and itching and jerking and snapping around. I slept. And I doubt very much that I felt much gratitude about it when I woke up. I figured it's about time I got a night's sleep, for God's sake, you know. Because that's the kind of mope I am, but I look back on that. Back to basics to me is I did what I was told to do knowing it wouldn't work, and the fact that I knew it wouldn't work didn't keep it from working. I mean, I've come to you time and time again, and here's my problem, and you give me some nonsensical answer that is not related to my problem at all. And I know it won't work, and I do what you tell me to do, and the problem goes away, and God, that's annoying. I mean, and it doesn't seem to matter what I think about it or what I believe about it. All it seems to, do I want to change? Yeah, I got to change. And change how you act. A couple of years went by, and I went to my sponsor. My problem is I hate my ex-wife. Hate her. She's a bad lady. And so my problem is, how do I change my feelings about my ex-wife? I mean, I just can't stay out of fights with her. And we talked about that for a little bit, but pretty soon we were talking about something unrelated. We're talking about how I'm doing on those child support payments. Well, I'll get to that when she shakes up. And he pointed out something to me that seemed to tie in with what had happened 2 years earlier, because he said, you know, the only way to change how you feel about somebody is to change the way you treat them. And in order for you to begin to feel anything but hatred for that woman, you're going to have to begin to treat her differently, and that, in your case, that means paying child support. You pay it right off the top. And he said, and don't go over there and give it to her in person. Put it in the mail. And I'd never thought of that. I want to go over there and tell her how to spend it. And he said, if you can't get it over there in the mail, get yourself another sponsor. He's a cold guy, is what he is. He's always cared enough about me to care how I act, because he knows that's the healing. And in those days, I didn't have a checking account. I went back to jail when I was 5 months sober for checks I wrote while I was drinking, and I didn't want any more of that, and so I did it on money orders. I didn't have a check. I told you, this is not a rocket to stardom story. I didn't have a checking account until I was 5 years sober. So I did it with money orders, and I went in the bank every payday and said, I need 9 money orders, and I'd give them the amount. They hated to see me coming, and now I had to add another money order to my list. Sometimes the tellers would say, Mr. Hodges, why don't you just get a checking account? I mean, we have to charge you 50 cents for these money orders, and if you had a checking account, it only costs you about a dime to write a check. I'd say, yeah, I know. Or if I was feeling ornery, I'd say, when I write a check, it costs me a couple of days in jail and about... So I added another money order to my list. God, I hated that woman. I mean, I'd drive down the freeway and the thought of her would come into my mind. I'm a great fantasizer. And I'd say, she'll say this, and I'm going to say that, and she'll say this, and I'm going to smack her. I'd be 4 off-ramps past where I wanted to go. But that guy in the next car would be kind of looking at me a little bit funny. And I began to send her the money every payday. Right off the top, just as I'd been told to do. I had to take an envelope with a stamp and an address on it into the bank and put that money order in it and mail it right there. If I thought about it 2 minutes, I was in trouble. Because I want her to shape up before I do any of this. And a couple of months went by. It wasn't very long. Maybe 3 or 4 months went by, and I'm driving down the freeway with a guy that I'm sponsoring, and he's screaming about his ex-wife. And his thing is that she's a bad mother. Now, I don't know if she was or not, but it seemed like a nice bag to get into, so I got into his bag with him, and we're going pretty good on that. Out of the clear blue sky, it occurred to me that I may not like that lady much, but she really is a terrific mother. She has provided a wonderful home for that kid, and it was the first positive thought I'd had about her. I thought, And a few more months go by, and a few more months go by, and toward the end of that year, come along about Christmas time, she called me up early in December, told me she needed that money a little bit early, and is there any way I could send it over to her a little early that month? I'll be damned if I didn't find myself going over there a couple of weeks early just to give her that money, just because she needed it. And that's not like me. I'm not what you'd call a compulsive child support payer, you know. But I hope I don't forget what happened that night. I went over there and I gave her the money without comment and spent a little time talking to my son, and we made plans to play ball that weekend with a bunch of guys that we got together with, and then I left. And it wasn't any big thing except walking down the steps from her apartment in Santa Monica on that brisk winter evening with the lights and the Christmas decorations and the cool breeze coming in from the ocean and that music in the air. I had the strangest sensation. I felt more like a man than I had ever felt before in my life. And all that had happened was that I had begun doing something that I was supposed to do all along. Now, it's hard to hate a woman under those circumstances. And it didn't look like for a long time we were ever going to be particularly friendly with one another. And what had happened, all that had happened is that I had changed the way I treated her and the way I dealt with responsibility. See, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to me doesn't have anything to do with stopping drinking. We know how to stop. What it seems to have so much to do with is about not starting anymore. And the way we don't start anymore is that we learn to live a different life so that we're not so haunted, so that we get a sense of dignity, so that we get a sense of who we are, so that we get a sense. It's that as long as I just know that gap is never going to fill, I'm in a lot of trouble. And it's funny, it's funny, that gap closes, and it's an odd way that it closes, not in any way I ever thought. For example, I thought I'm a social drinker. I should stay out of that beer bar, I look like a drunk because I forget to eat, I look like a drunk because I hang around with the wrong crowd. I'm not an alcoholic, I'm a social drinker, and the whole idea of my drinking is to make sure that I drink like a social drinker. Well, the day I was able to accept myself as I really was, that gap closed. I'm a drunk. I am a drunk. Now, do I want to do something about it? Well, I quit drinking, and you can hardly tell me from a real person anymore. I'm basically an honest man. Oh, I tell a little white lie now and again, but I'm a liar is what I am. Now, do I want to change? Are we going to get back to basics? I'll tell you what, I don't have to change, except unless I want to live comfortably, of course. I'm basically a faithful husband. Oh, I get lonely from now and, Well, in every area of my life, I've had to say, this is where I am. If I want to change it on the pro golf circuit, I don't golf, but they tell me that the golfers tell you that you have to hit the ball from where it lies. Well, I'd rather stay on the green, if you don't mind. And if the ball's in the sand trap, hey, I'll flail at it and look good. The ball won't move, of course. Funny, when I finally admit where the ball is and go over and give it a rap, it's astonishing how easy it is to get that ball moving. It's astonishing how difficult it is to get it to move from a distance. The day came as it does for all of us, I think. And I was about 3 or 3.5 years sober when I ran out of my own resources. See, my thing is that I don't want to take step 3. Taking step 3 requires that I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, as I understand God. Well, I have a funny idea of God. I'm trying to shop around with my grandmother's God and my mother's God, and I know God doesn't know anything about business or sex, and those are the only problems I'm interested in solving today. But I came to a point in my life where I was out of answers, out of replies. I'd been sober 3 years. See, that was another thing I was afraid of. If I turn my will and my life over to the care of God, He's going to send me to China to be a missionary. And I don't want to go to China. And I finally snapped one day to the fact that when I'm running the show, I go to the Glendale drunk tank. Now, how much worse can China be than the Glendale drunk tank? And that helped me, and I just made the decision one day. Turned out He didn't want me in China. He wanted me to stay in Santa Monica and pay child support is what He seemed to have in mind. But that was a valuable lesson for me because I learned it's safe. I learned it's safe. It gives me a sense of who I am, and a sense of safety, and a sense of having a power greater than me that gives me a comfort that I don't know any other way to get. Now, am I a religious man? No. Do I go to church? No. Do I have a personal relationship with God as I understand God? Yes. I found out something else that's quite interesting, I think. While we're all God's children, I've been assured that God has no grandchildren. So I have to develop my own relationship with Him. I can't go through my sponsor or my grandmother or whoever. But I can develop that kind of a relationship. I remember, too, some of the struggles that I had when I was just getting sober was, one of them, I was so shocked to believe that you thought I would always be an alcoholic. I mean, come on. You mean I won't build up some good drinking time if I hang around here with you? And those people in that club in Glendale used to say, you can turn a cucumber into a pickle, but you can't turn the pickle back into a cucumber. Well, I was hoping for something with a little more zen in it, if you don't mind, you know. I'm not really into pickles and cucumbers. Now, I know tonight I'm always going to be an alcoholic, but the guy that kind of set it up for me was a guy named Hank that came through talking about that problem, and he decided he was always going to, and so what? I can't drink. There's a lot of things I can't do. I can't drink successfully. All right. And I never will be able to drink successfully. It's not a big thing in my life today, but it loomed large when I was new. And Hank had worked through that problem himself, and about the time that he got it all sorted out in his mind, he also decided it'd be a good idea if he left his body to science. And so he got to thinking about that, how when he died they'd take him to a teaching hospital or a medical school someplace, and they'd do an autopsy, and they'd take out his kidneys and throw them in a jar, and they'd take his eyes, run them down the hall, and they'd take out his liver and do something with it, and they'd finally get around to taking out his brain, and they'd drop that in a jar of alcohol. And Hank got to thinking about that, and he figured the way he said it, he said, if that doctor listens real close, when he drops my brain in that jar of alcohol, he's going to hear, I like that better than pickles and cucumbers, you know. If this program stands for anything, it stands for the proposition that will work in every area of my life. I don't believe that God cares what I do for a living, but I believe that He wants me to be happy. I had a variety of jobs. The first job I had after I got rid of selling encyclopedias was selling imprinted ballpoint pens. I did that for a year. I'll call on service days and say, here's I can put your name right here, sir. Buffalo's Shelf Service. There's a calendar. Maybe you'd like to see it there. That's not the kind of work that made my heart sore, but I did it. Then I got a job selling dictating equipment, and that was the first job I ever had with a salary, other than the Marine Corps. Did that a couple of years. Then I got a job with a outfit selling a little computer, and I wound up selling carpets for a national manufacturer. And the carpet, there's nothing wrong with that. I made a good living at it, except that
my heart was never in it. I just never could care much whether I stuffed a couple of rolls of carpet in that guy's shop or not. I knew that there were some people that enjoyed the way they earned their living. And so I began to kind of peck around a little bit, and I'd question people and talk about it, and they would always say, well, what do you want to do? And I would say, I don't know. I know what I don't want to do. And I'd snivel and carry on, and finally somebody said, why don't you tear up that list? And I said, well, it's a list of things you don't want to do. I mean, what do you really know about what you don't want to do? And I realized that I got a mind that slams shut, you know. And when you would say, well, how about that? I'd immediately discard it. And the idea was for me to keep an open mind. And so I decided that if this higher power was interested in me at all, he was probably willing that I find a way to earn a living that would be fun to do. And I decided to keep an open mind. And it wasn't 90 days. I guess I was 4 years sober, 4.5 years sober. A bunch of us are helping somebody move, and I'm on the back of a stake bed truck, and I'm on one side of a refrigerator, and another guy's holding it down from the other end, and he poked his head around the door, and he said, you know, Clint, you ought to go to law school. And that was one of the things that was on my list of things I was never going to do. But I'd torn up my list, and so I began to think about it, and I began to look into it. I found out you could do it at night, found out it'd take 4 years. I got to work during the day, got to pay those bills, I got to go to meetings at night. I don't know how I'm going to jam law school in that. Besides that, I went back and said, you know how old I'll be in 4 years if I go to law school? He said, well, how old will you be in 4 years if you don't go to law school? And again I said, oh. I said, oh, a lot. And that's all I was in law school. 170 of us started. And 4 years later, 46 of us were graduated. It was 1975. There were a lot of AAs at that graduation, a lot of hooping and hollering, and now I have to take a California bar examination, which is a colorful 3-day exercise and a tough examination. A lot of guys don't pass it the first or the second or the fifth time. But for me, I suppose as formidable as anything was filling out the application to take that bar examination, because they just get to all the wrong questions. I don't know who made that thing up, but for example, they wanted to know where I had lived since I was 16 years old. I mean, 2 weeks here, a month there, that's a lot of addresses. And a long list. And in the garage, and a Pontiac for a month, you know. And I got all that done, and they said, have you ever been arrested for anything other than minor traffic violations? And they leave 3 little lines. And I typed very neatly in there, see attached page. Were you ever the subject of any militant discipline while a member of the armed forces? And another page went on the back. Were you ever named as a defendant in a civil action, include divorces, annulments? More. I didn't want to put it all down there because I really had the feeling that if they knew who I was, that of course they would not let me take their examination. Because if I passed it, they'd have to give me a license. And I wasn't going to put it all down there until you convinced me of something that was very basic, and that is that if I didn't put it down there, I was giving myself permission to fail. I was setting up the failure because I can figure, well, they're going to catch me anyway, and so why bother? And once I understood that, I figured if I'm going to take that exam, I might as well put it all down there and just see what happens. And I did. It was not easy, and I didn't do it agreeably or quickly, but I finally put everything down there, even stuff I knew they wouldn't catch. I bundled it all up with twine and sent it up to Sacramento. And they let me take the test. So I sat downtown Los Angeles in the convention center for 3 days with a couple of thousand other men and women and wrote that test. And then I had to wait 4 months see if I didn't do that a day at a time. I heard a very interesting thing about a day at a time. A guy one time was talking about the 11th step, which says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand God. I had, at the time I heard that, which was about 12 years ago, never been aware of a conscious contact with God. Never, ever. And this guy was at the podium, and he said, the only time that any of us can ever have a conscious contact, and he paused, and I was thinking he's going to say when we're at a meeting, or when we're doing a loving thing for somebody else, or when we're helping another alcoholic, or when we're meditating. He said the only time that any of us can ever have a conscious contact with God is right now. Is right now. And I thought about that so much and it still occurs to me, and it means a lot to me, because living in the moment is something I never wanted to do. I annihilated the moment with that booze. I go back to last week and up to next year, my ego will drive me both directions, and guilt will do the same thing. And I don't want to ever live in the day. Never mind, give us this day our daily bread. I want to bounce around, and I can do that, and I have the choice to do that, except that I go alone. I mean, like this morning, I was thinking about being here tonight and talking, and I was jumping ahead about 12 hours, so I was getting nervous and irritable. Because I make that trip alone. Now, right here, right now, we're fine. I have a great sense of the presence of God in this room. And a great sense that we're together here with a common purpose that we can call our own. And tomorrow, as I inevitably will, I'll return to this podium and fuss about it. And I'll come back alone, dead alone. And so right now is the only time I have. And I didn't do any of that in that 4 months I was waiting for the bar exam. But on Thanksgiving Eve in 1975, I was at home with Betty, and I got a call from a guy that I sponsored that worked in the coal type room at the Herald Examiner newspaper in Los Angeles, and he said, your name's on the list. I said, which list do you have? He said, you passed that test. I couldn't believe it. I had flat affect to that information. I just couldn't believe it. The next morning was Thanksgiving morning, and we had breakfast. I began to cry. I just thought, that's incredible, because I can't do anything for any period of time at all, and to have gotten through that and taken that test with those mopes and passed that examination is just incredible. And of course, by that afternoon, I was thinking, they ought to tighten the standards up a little to keep those dummies out. But I love it. I've been doing that kind of work since, and I just love it. It's an exciting thing that gives me a reason to get up and get rolling in the morning. And I've had some moments that I thought I would never smile again, and I've had some clients that demanded justice. I always tell them, no. We don't ask for justice. Mercy. I don't want any justice. I've had all the justice. I was back over a couple of years ago. I was back over in Glendale. I live in San Clemente now, and I work in Santa Ana. I was in Glendale a few years ago. And in that same building where I had stood so many times in front of the judge and said, guilty, Your Honor, they have the municipal court on the first floor and the superior court up one flight. And I was in the superior court that day, and they called the case, and I stood up and I answered ready for the defendant. And I took care of whatever it was. It was not a big thing, but I got that done. And I was leaving the courthouse, and I went past the door of the municipal courtroom where I had stood so many times, and somebody was coming out. And as I looked down there, I snapped. I saw the judge. Ken White was still on the bench. I saw my replacement standing there in front of him. And I thought, that really is incredible. There's no way for me to get from being the defendant in municipal court to being answering ready for the defendant in superior court. I mean, it's only one slide up, but it's just light years away. It's just light years away, and I don't think it's a miracle. The miracle is I didn't drink today. But it's not. It's because of God's grace. It's because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's because I learned here that there were certain things I had to do if I wanted to change how I lived and how I felt. I have to change how I act. I have to take these steps and apply them to my life. And they work for me. They work for anybody. They don't know who it is that's taken them. They'll work for you. If you're new here tonight, they'll work for you. And so he really does hold me in the hollow of his hand. And if my mama were here tonight, she might say, what will you do when you meet your Maker? And I suppose if she did, I would say, we've already met. I meet him every day. Those guys in that club in Glendale introduced me to him 15 years ago, and I didn't even know it. Meet him every day, and it's made my life so much better. You see, I'm just a drunk. I haven't had a drink all day long, and I'm glad to be part of this conference. Thank you. That test, I couldn't believe it. I had flat affect to that information. I just couldn't believe it. The next morning was Thanksgiving morning, and we had breakfast. I began to cry. I just thought, that's incredible, because I can't do anything for any period of time at all, and to have gotten through that and taken that test with those mopes and passed that examination is just incredible. And of course, by that afternoon, I was thinking, they ought to tighten the standards up a little to keep those dummies out. But I love it. I've been doing that kind of work since, and I just love it. It's an exciting thing that gives me a reason to get up and get rolling in the morning. And I've had some moments that I thought I would never smile again. And I've had some clients that demanded justice. I always tell them, no. We don't ask for justice. Mercy. I don't want any justice. I've got all the justice. I was back over a couple of years ago. I was back over in Glendale. I live in San Clemente now, and I work in Santa Ana. I was in Glendale a few years ago. And in that same building where I had stood so many times in front of the judge and said, guilty, Your Honor, they had the municipal court on the first floor and superior court up one flight. And I was in the superior court that day, and they called the case, and I stood up and I answered ready for the defendant. And I took care of whatever it was. It was not a big thing, but I got that done. And I was leaving the courthouse, and I went past the door of the municipal courtroom where I had stood so many times, and somebody was coming out. And as I looked down there, I snapped. I saw the judge. Ken White was still on the bench. I saw my replacement standing there in front of him. And I thought, that really is incredible. There's no way for me to get from being the defendant in municipal court to being answering ready for the defendant in superior court. I mean, it's only one slide up, but it's just light years away. It's just light years away, and I don't think it's a miracle. The miracle is I didn't drink today. But it's not. It's because of God's grace. It's because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's because I learned here that there were certain things I had to do if I wanted to change how I lived and how I felt. I have to change how I act. I have to take these steps and apply them to my life. And they work for me. They work for anybody. They don't know who it is that's taken them. They'll work for you. If you're new here tonight, they'll work for you.